I mean, this is actually pretty good news, mates. I mean, let's not lie. I think this new director take that was released yesterday at the start of season 7 from Aaron Keller is actually a lot of really, really good news. Now, I was a little bit sad because this patch was just a bunch of bug fixes that wiped all my recloads during the complete DPS guide, which was like, no. But the good news is that this director's take is actually really, really interesting. I'm going to go through it, highlight some of these segments, and give some of my own thoughts at the end that I think are particularly important. One of the things you can absolutely say about Overwatch 2 is say what you will, but the communication has been 10 times, almost literally 10 times better than it was in Overwatch 1. The amount of times that we go for months and months and months with zero communication and really just not a lot of transparency about a lot of things that needed transparency. It happened so many times. But in Overwatch 2, we've had a lot more communication. Now, obviously, there's still been a lot of bad decisions, I feel like. However, I feel like all things considered, the communication has never been a bad thing. And I think Aaron Keller deserves a lot of credit for that. So let's talk about the Sombra rework here. So this please mark the release of our Sombra rework. The hero keeps the same hacker fantasy. We talked about virus. The win rate actually jumped up, being slightly higher at lower tiers and bottoming out in masters and above around 46 to 47%. And this definitely lines up with my experience. I think the ability to just assassinate somebody with virus and shooting them is really, really, really broken in the right hands. The problem is that's a very niche circumstance. I would say a very niche circumstance, but it's a circumstance that becomes more and more niche as the enemy team gets a little bit better at supporting each other, a little bit better at awareness, and just understanding that Sombra is a lot more punishable now. When I was playing Sombra in some of the lower tier lobbies, somewhere like the high plat, low diamond lobbies, it felt a lot more free to kind of do what I want because people just didn't really pay attention to me. And so it was super, super easy to spawn camp people. But then as I moved up higher in the ranks, people realized, oh, this guy's Translocator is really, really bad. Like, it's actually probably one of the worst defensive cooldowns in the game. It's super easy to punish. And they would chase me down all the time. If I timed it wrong, people and supports were way more attentive to helping their DPS, and people were way more attentive to spawn camping. And so I actually feel that she's a lot weaker to play at a high level. And I think that's a general consensus from most high-level Sombra players. Obviously, there's a lot to be talked about with Sombra. I'm not going to get into that today. I'm going to make an entire video about my problems with Sombra right now. But she is absolutely a lot of fun to play, and I think this recognizes that. So this is good to know. Okay. Anyway, they're looking at the effectiveness of EMP and the frequency of cooldowns. I think that's probably something that they need to be looking at here. I would like them to look at the locator speed, the speed of that animation, but we'll talk about that later. So rework the primary fire, take a breather, and an all-new ability for Roadhog. Super, super exciting. Won't be here for mid-season patch, will be coming later. A little bit more detail based off of stats, community feedback. Talk about supports. So we're going to be looking at some support changes, potentially on targeting the utility and opening up windows of vulnerability. Now, I think one of the things that I want to be keeping in mind with the supports is I hope that they do a little something with the support passive that make it a little bit longer before it kicks in. And I would love to see that some of the utility that supports have to keep their tanks and DPS alive to be slightly less effective when keeping themselves alive. You see, if a Kiriko has more motivation to use Suzu on herself when she's taking a deep flank or a deep off angle than she has to use on her teammates, then the motivation of the utility is more to use it selfishly. And I think right now we have a lot of utility that could be pretty much just used selfishly, which allows supports to be really strong in 1v1. It's not just the potency of the utility, it's also the fact that the utility is oftentimes used selfishly when that's really frustrating for the DPS or even the enemy support trying to duel you. So good to note that. We'll keep an eye on that one. From a stats perspective, Orisa isn't our top performing tanks. That spot goes to Reinhardt at lower skill tiers and Sigma at the high end. Now, obviously, stats don't always tell the full picture, but I find this to be very eye-opening. And this is something that I've talked about for months now, for a long time. One of the problems with tanking is if getting a value and the actual feeling of getting value are two very different things, direct versus indirect value. The dopamine of actually getting kills is not something that you might always be getting with Reinhardt when they go counter comp, but you will still be providing a lot of space and utility to your team and creating opportunities for your team to win the game. So what might be happening is with Orisa, because she has so many tools, whether it's Fortify, Javelin Spin, her higher HP tool, or the CC that she has with her Javelin, she has the feeling of being able to contribute a lot, but she doesn't actually contribute as much as she thinks. And this lines up with my experience playing a lot of Orisa back in the day, where you can actually feel like you even farm a lot of stats and don't have a lot of deaths, but you're not winning games. You're not creating enough space. You're not creating enough kill pressure consistently, and you have a harder time interacting with anybody besides the enemy tank. And so the win rate seems to be reflecting that. And so I think the reason that this is important is not just that, oh, Orisa is an OP, don't nerf Orisa, although that is something to consider. Key thing to keep in mind is that when we're balancing for balance or we're balancing for fun, we would love for those to be the same thing. In fact, it's very important that we look at Orisa and be like, why does she feel good even when she's bad? and see if we can learn our lesson when we're thinking about things that can make other tanks feel better. Balancing for psychology is incredibly important. If it's a well-balanced game, but people don't have fun playing it, then that's no good. Imagine if you played Winston every single time and you had 50 less HP, but every single time you jumped onto somebody, they would take 50% more damage. So you would jump onto somebody, you would die almost instantaneously, but then your team would massacre them. Would that be fun for the Winston player? Unless you're kind of like psychopathic, probably not, right? But that would be very, very potent. And you kind of see what I'm saying? So I hear in my eyes. So it's actually very important that you actually balance for what's fun and what's actually balanced at the same time. I think human psychology thinks that they want balance, but sometimes we don't always want perfect balance. Sometimes we have to find what's actually fun. And it's also especially important to consider what characters are generally perceived as fun. While there are definitely some nuance with that opinion, there are objectively some characters that are significantly less popular. And so having those characters to be balanced but also have a high pick rate is something that we have to be really careful about. Okay, so midseason balance patch is also going to address Bastion's assault form, which I think is fair. I wish they do a little bit more with Bastion, but we'll cross that road when we get there. Okay, Halloween Terror. We won't go as much over the PvE thing because I'm not as interested in that. The K-pop collaboration, which I think is, I freaking hate K-pop, but I think it's a really smart decision from Overwatch and from Blizzard. It's a huge demographic. It's a demographic that bleeds in well with the current Overwatch fan base. So I think it's going to be really, really, really popular. Say what you will about the quality of the music. Don't violate me in the comments. It's just not good. I'm not familiar with this band though, so I guess I should reserve judgment there. Regardless, this is a great move in terms of the some good news for the press for Overwatch, which is what we desperately need. I guess I will talk about the Halloween Terror event. I did play that. I will say that my major complaint is that the environment is kind of dull, right? I think that's just the common complaint with that the game mode. The upgrading and the new abilities were pretty fun. I enjoyed playing it. Obviously, it's Overwatch PvE. It's never going to be S tier. It's always going to be a little bit bland. But I enjoyed the guns upgrading. I enjoyed the flexibility of who I could pick. I just didn't like the fact that it was just one particular spot. You just kind of rotated around and around and around. Last thing to point out here, and I won't go read the text here. I'll just basically give you my takeaways that we're talking basically about monetization, skins, and stuff like that. Wait, what? They're talking about monetization and skins publicly, and they're admitting an error with this. And I think obviously, communication doesn't necessarily equal action. It seems like it does here, though. But I appreciate this. This is not something that you see all the time. Certainly not from Overwatch's past. So, is this an encouraging move from the game? Yes, absolutely. Is this going to set a precedent moving forward? Well, remains to be seen, right? I think, especially after the PvE debacle of this past summer, obviously a lot of it is you got to earn our trust back. But I think little things like this transparency about so many things, and really some pretty encouraging news about a lot of these changes, I think remains to be overall a positive change. So shout out to Aaron Keller. Shout out to Overwatch 2. I love your game. Hopefully we see more directors' takes like these moving forward and changes that also reflect the positive nature of these changes. So what do you guys think in the comments? Let me know, and I'll chat with you guys later.